Welcome to our first online talk in 2022. I'm very delighted to see new faces today, which clearly shows that the interest in co-creating innovation for sustainability is, it's on our agenda. And at the Geneva Macro Labs, we really felt that the beginning of this year is an excellent occasion to reflect with you on how we can best address macro challenges as we are looking forward to engaging looking forward to an eventful 2022. Please note that we therefore decided to extend today's session from the usual 60 minutes to 90 minutes, as the format will be slightly different. So today we will discuss with you challenges and also opportunities when we use collective intelligence as a foundation for creating innovation, which is meant to make an impact. And I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Dr. Paul Taffender, neuroscientist Dr. Alexandra Bertichevskaya, and my Geneva Macro Labs colleagues, Dr. Leonie Achnich and Dr. Eckhard Ernst. Thank you for being with us today. I am Marion Scherling, Head of Stakeholder Engagement at GEM Labs, and I will be moderating our session today. Allow me to share a few words about our work at the Geneva Macro Labs. We are a Geneva-based intellectual catalyst that works to support the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And our mission is to shape international collaboration, to build capacity, and also to accelerate the implementation of sustainable development goals. We combine the thinking and doing for making sustainability actionable, and we also look at how new technologies can support a sustainable future. It is in this context that we host webinars, conferences, trainings, and leverage the intellectual potential around this. And we, for instance, develop solutions papers to inform policymakers and have created an initiative called Geneva Impacts, which is a new venture builder approach to coin the world of impact creating investment. Now, a month ago, we kickstarted another innovation process, and now we are getting ready for our next big event, which is a design thinking hackathon, early February. It's the perfect opportunity for experiencing live our methodology, which is highly conducive to impact innovation. Please stay tuned tonight, as Leonie, my colleague, will share a bit more about our endeavor during the session today. And I'm also happy to announce that a few days ago, Springer published a paper of ours in which we reflect on our work at Geneva Impacts and we present the methodology behind. And please find the link in the chat box. I will just post it shortly there. So let's go right into the topic. There is no doubt that 2022 will be another year of tests, from the COVID-19 pandemic to worsening climate impacts, and also the continued unraveling of hard-won gains on everything from curbing poverty to closing the gender divide. Now, the coming year will also test our commitment and resolve in our ability to galvanize and build trust within and across communities to address the multitude of challenges that demand that we work together. So one big question in this context is, how can we all reach a just balance between our economic, social, ecological, and political endeavors? And in order to explore possible answers, we have organized our discussion today the following way. We will see that now on the agenda. Thank you for showing the agenda on the slide. So we will first listen to a keynote from Paul Taffender, the founder and managing partner of Taffender Consulting, a consultancy and thought leadership center. Paul will set out some of the tactics for tackling global transformation issues through systemic innovation. And Paul is the author of the award-winning book titled Big Change. And based on Big Change, Paul will outline how his transformation model could help to forge innovative implementations to tackle the coming decade's global needs. We will then move to our virtual fireside chat with Alexandra Bertichevskaya, who is the principal researcher at Nesta's Center for Collective Intelligence Design, the Global Innovation Foundation, and we'll also discuss with Leonie Achnich from our GEM Labs community what we are up to. During both parts, the keynote and the fireside chat, you can already post your questions in the chat box, or you can simply comment on the debate. And Eckhard Ernst, president of our Think and Do Tank, who is also a chief macroeconomist at the ILO, will open the floor for discussion and moderate this last part of our session today. So, Paul, lovely to have you with us today. Let me share a few words about your background. You are the founder and managing partner of Tafinder Consulting. And I understand that you advise senior executives globally on large-scale strategic questions, innovation, and organizational transformation. With a PhD in psychology, you have written a number of books, and one we will hear about a little bit more today. Books on leadership and enterprise transformation. You are a visiting professor at Goldsmiths College, University of London, and you are also an entrepreneur in residence at Lancaster University Management School. Your book, Big Change, won the Wiley Business Management Book of the Year Award in 1998. And since then, you have been using that book a lot for advising your clients. Now, Paul, in our prep call, we spent quite some time discussing some principles for group problem solving, which involves adaptivity. And it seems to me that as if, in particular, at the macro level, say at the national level, such adaptivity is extremely difficult. So one of your key points is that the need for, that we have a need for systemic innovation. But how can we, in the first place, optimize the conditions for innovating together in order to address macro challenges best? And being completely biased here, I would argue that think tank or do tanks are best suited to do so. So what does your experience teach us? Paul, over to you.
Thank you. All right, so I'll just try to share screen now, which should be that one. And
yeah, we can see it.
So it should come up as slideshow. Oops, we've gone too far. Let me just come back. There we are. Thank you, Marianne, and welcome everyone. It's good to be here. When Eckhard and Marianne first started talking to me about this subject, we talked a lot about sustainable development and sustainability issues and challenges. And one of the topics was collective intelligence applied to that. And that got me thinking about other types of intelligence, so fluid intelligence in particular, which we'll touch on. And then innovation and systemic innovation, which I've written about. Now, my experience is all about how you do transformation in corporates, and so in the commercial environment. And the whole discussion with Eckhard and Marianne got me thinking about, could you apply some of this very directly in terms of lessons, tactics, approaches to big sustainability challenges in the global community? And so that's really what this discussion is about. And I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to have a go and see what your thoughts are in terms of what the differences are if you're trying to do something which is in an alliance to change something involving government, non-government organizations, etc., and whether you can apply these things in the same sort of way. So here we go. We all know that there are lots of global challenges, and you can see a list there on the right-hand side. I don't need to, go through each one of those in turn. But what is interesting about them, if you look at them, is that they are complex. We know that they have different components within them that cause the complexity, but we also know that they interact. So, to take one example, people who are living in poverty or have massive unemployment, youth unemployment, etc., are not that interested in ecological sustainability. If tactics and approaches and innovation helps them with getting out of poverty and with greater employment, they will. And so in that one simple example, you're looking at the complexity of things that operate together and that connect and that therefore cause you a systems problem, i.e. if you look at it, you've got to look at the whole system and work out which bits you focus on in order to change the whole thing. So I guess when we think about all of these problems, we think about them in systems terms. We've got to think about how do we do problem solving at scale for these kind of macro challenges. And that does take you into the whole area of systems thinking. Let's just take a quick look at one example of that in the systems arena.
Training fleas requires a glass jar with a lid. The fleas are placed inside the jar and the lid is then sealed. They are left undisturbed for 3 days. Then, when the jar is opened, the fleas will not jump out. In fact, the fleas will never jump higher than the level set by the lid. Their behaviour is now set for the rest of their lives. And when these fleas reproduce, their offspring will automatically follow their example.
So there you have you have a system operating, which is very hard to change unless you intervene at the systems level. And I just like that as an example of how systems do operate. And of course, one of the reasons that a system is difficult to change is because it reaches a point of homeostasis. It's difficult to change because it has interdependent parts that work in a kind of dynamic equilibrium. And so if you try to change one part, it kind of self-corrects to go back to the old way of working. Now, I've seen that many times in a system called an organization, a commercial organization, and they are very hard to change. You find that if you try to change one part of the organization, it seems to self-correct and it doesn't change completely, and you have to then go in and look at the whole system in a different way. And I think in the same way, when we're looking at social enterprises or big sustainability problems, you've got the same kinds of system problems, i.e. vested interests, incentives not aligned, the way the structures are organized and run that cause you to go back to homeostasis. And so the real question, I guess, is how can we optimize innovation if we're trying to change big macro challenges in order to break through this homeostatic plateau? And if we think about how you solve problems, obviously intelligence is a big component part of that. It's the foundation of problem solving. And so what I thought would be worth doing is just laying out quickly what the different sorts of intelligence are. And so for a long time now, we've known that there are two components of intelligence. One is crystallized intelligence, known by psychologists as GC, and this is really based on your past experience in the cultural environment. So it's skills, knowledge, learning, your learning history, etc. And then there's fluid intelligence, which is shaped by your primary intellectual aptitude. So breadth of memory or conceptual reasoning, speed of analysis, etc. And then of course, collective intelligence, which we'll touch on obviously in the course of this whole discussion, which is how people bring their individual intelligence together to solve a range of problems. That can also be enhanced by using AI, machine learning, and so forth. But the point I wanted to make was down the bottom here, that crystallized intelligence works well for domain-specific problems because you have examples and expertise and knowledge that has been applied to similar problems in the past, or at least in that domain. Whereas fluid intelligence works well to solve novel problems, so where you're using creative and flexible intellect, so that prior knowledge and prior experience is less helpful or can even be a blockage. In other words, it takes you down the same route of going back to homeostasis. So I think we need to think about intelligence in a different way, I think, if we're trying to solve problems through innovation. Example, I think that of the challenges we face, though, when we're looking at really large problems, is this one, is that when you face big challenges that require transformation, you can sometimes see them in this form, that you can anticipate what they are, you can anticipate the problems and try to do something about them, you can react to them, but sometimes they are discontinuous, i.e. whatever solutions you put up, it's very difficult to change them. And so if you're working within the frame, which you see here, i.e. it's an incremental problem to solve, it's a lot easier. But if you're working on discontinuous issues, i.e. that you need to change the path that they were taking before, it's much more difficult. And so you need to either bend the frame of the particular system you're working with or actually break the frame completely. I've thrown in some examples here that I thought might be relevant. So for example, under anticipating a particular problem and applying incremental changes to it, take up of low energy LED lighting. If it's reactive, it might be improvements to existing plastics and recycling. If it's redirecting it, it's reskilling a whole workforce for the future. And the biggest problems, of course, are where you've got to actually break the frame. You've got to do things completely differently. And that could be something like transforming the food model, or introducing a circular economy. That is a break from the past. This is a very different way of doing things. And so the scale and novelty of the challenge drive the need for different types of intelligence and different types of problem solving. So with all that said, it seems to me that there are probably 5 things that might matter here if you apply them from transformation in the corporate world to transformation across whole systems in the sustainability world, whatever those problems are that we mentioned right at the start. Number 1, select for fluid intelligence, because it doesn't seem to be amenable to development or training, although there is some evidence that might help. Optimize the team innovation climate, and then don't be afraid of conflict. Conflict is wildly misunderstood in most social organizations, enterprises, and there are good parts of conflict as well as bad. 4th point, deploy systemic innovation principles, which I'll touch on in a few minutes. And then finally, I have this question, which I developed 20 odd years ago in my book, Big Change, around the transformation S-curve as a framework for actually changing a whole organization gradually over time. And I just wonder, and it's where I need your help here, I guess, is to have a discussion about whether it's possible to use that sort of framework for complex macro challenges. So what I wanted to do in the next 15 minutes or so was just run through each one of those and give some ideas and pointers about this that we can get into in discussion later. First one is for fluid intelligence, there are ways to assess for it, and we can see them here, because it seems to be a fixed aptitude. You really need to select for it. And there's the Raven progressive matrices is one test that helps you to understand what fluid intelligence is like in an individual, and Cattell's culture for IQ test, the Wechsler adult intelligence scale. And you can see an example from the Ravens test on the right-hand side there. So you're looking for what is the particular pattern that would fit in that spot in the bottom right. And if you can't work that out in the time it takes me to talk through this page, then your fluid intelligence isn't very high, probably. That's a bit of an overgeneralization, but that's how these tests work. And they are based on some very good research over the last 40 years or more, 50 years or more that can help in this area. It does seem difficult to develop fluid intelligence, but there is some evidence that NBAC training, which is sort of memory type training method, can help, but the evidence is a bit ropey on that still. But I think more broadly, if we take this whole intelligence conversation into the area of collective intelligence, then it's very obvious, I think, that, and I think Marianne referred to this in the introduction, that you can apply other types of creative problem solving to particular types of issues. So design thinking, root cause analysis, counterfactual thinking, Socratic questioning, all these types of things do help to actually increase your ability to innovate in a different way for the kind of problems that we're talking about. Now, I've used all of those things in the corporate world applied to transformation, or applied to strategic analysis, or applied to digital innovation. And they work more or less in different contexts, depending on how well you put them together. But I think they are well worth using in this context too. Second point is about teams. And there's some very good work done by a Swedish researcher called Göran Ekvall over 15 to 20 years, when he looked at what's the difference between those organizations that seem to innovate well and those that seem to be stagnated. They don't innovate, they don't seem to change much. And he pinpointed the following 10 factors you see on this page, which you see there: challenge, freedom, idea support, etc. And then created a survey which looked at the climate of a particular work group or a climate of an organization, and how you could measure the extent to which they were likely to be innovative or not. And you see on the right-hand side there an example of the output from that particular type of assessment, which is now called the Situational Outlook Questionnaire. What was interesting about his work was that he said all these 10 mattered if you got them right, but for those organizations that were radical innovators, really, really good at creating discontinuous change or discontinuous innovation, a real break from the past, to do something very new, then the items which are marked with the asterisk, so freedom, dynamism, debates, and risk-taking were the four that made the big difference. They were the ones that had the biggest impact, if you like, in terms of innovation across the organization. So it's worth bearing that in mind. It is possible to assess a whole team, and it's possible, therefore, to try to, through leadership and management, create the right environment for innovation. As I say, the way you can get hold of this test is through the Creative Problem Solving Group in Buffalo. They do the Situational Outlook Questionnaire. Very interesting test, and it's a nice way to start to think about how you can improve innovation in a team. The other thing that's worth thinking about is conflict. Now, conflict tends to be avoided in most organizations. It seems to me it is often avoided where we're looking at sustainability challenges. And there are two types of conflict in these kinds of settings. One is cognitive or task conflict. So this is arguments or debate or discussion about strategy, resources, policies, procedures, etc. And then there's the affective or the social emotional type of conflict, which is about what you believe in or the norms of a particular organization or your personal identity or the identity of the group. And some very good psychological research over the last 30 years or so has shown that what you really need to do is to raise the level of task conflict, but lower the level of affective or social emotional conflict. Why does that matter? Well, for this reason, what psychologists have shown is that there's an inverted U-shaped relationship between performance and conflict intensity. So as conflict intensity increases, so performance increases, and that is your task conflict. But if it goes too far, as the intensity of the conflict increases, you end up with social conflict. So this is the emotional, the values-driven, etc. And the problem with that, of course, is, well, the good thing about the task conflict is that you end up with better understanding of problems, shared comprehension of complex issues, and better solutions. Whereas if you end up with social conflict and you're involved in social conflict too much, that produces undesirable outcomes. So distraction, lower performance, rigidity of thinking, groupthink, etc. So I think it's always worth thinking about what you do with this kind of thing in a team setting or across different parts of different enterprises that are working together in some sort of alliance. The basic principle is this, that you need to promote task conflict. So don't be afraid of having debate about facts, about evidence, about opposing views, rather than postponing it or driving it below the surface. And it is very common, as I've observed on many occasions, in organizations that managers, leaders generally, and people in the organization don't like conflict and tend to shy away from it. And that couldn't be further from the truth if you want to try to create high performance. On the other hand, of course, what you don't want is problems with social or affective conflict, and therefore you need to build unity and cohesion around common values. And what that means is that we need to understand what we stand for. We need to know what our purpose is. You know, how do we work as a team? How will we resolve issues? And those kind of things can be built into what you could call a code of conduct for the team. This is how we work, and we're all buying into this way of working. And that helps you to make sure that you are lowering the problem around social conflict. The other area that I mentioned was, what are the systemic innovation principles? And I've got a list here, which I'll put down. Again, you know, this is applied to the corporate world. The question is, can you apply this across issues which are to do with sustainability? The first one is a leadership task, which is really, can you create the expectation of innovative practice? People react very strongly to what you might call self-fulfilling beliefs. If you have strong belief that you can actually be innovative, that can help tremendously in getting people to do things which are actually innovative. It's a bit like the modern notion around in psychology that if you tell yourself that you are excited as opposed to afraid, that can actually affect your performance in a good way. So just that self-conversation can actually help your performance. Second one is that if you have a task force which is working on a particular challenge, you actually have to deliberately try to do what somebody once said said to me, and they call constructive damage to the status quo. You actually have to start to deliberately change the way the status quo operates in order to try to shift the way the organization or the task force is working, all the problems you face, in order to change them. It is a deliberate act to do that. You can't just pretend that the change will happen in the future. You have to start doing that early on. Third one is build the ethos for innovation, which is what we've already talked about under ECVAL, so the innovation climate, and those 10 factors and the 4 that make for radical innovation. Fourth one is change the people mix to get idea diversity. And here we have to be careful about what we mean by diversity. What we mean by diversity is different backgrounds, different disciplines that are brought to bear for a problem-solving task at the macro level. And then the final area, I would say, is sometimes lacking in the sustainability arena, is we have to execute on new ideas. So you can't just innovate, create new ideas that are never deployed and you can't test. So the idea of trying things and experimenting and getting them wrong in an agile way is very, very important. And I know that GemLabs have written some papers on this idea of working in an agile way. It is very, very important that we try to experiment even if we fail.
Mm-hmm. I think, Paul, that's a really, really important point that you just have raised. Just looking at the time, I suggest, because I know that you really prepared an interesting point on constructive instability. And I would suggest that we revisit that discussion when we are opening a space for discussing with the audience tonight. And you would allude to the fact that when we have these big transformations ahead of us, we need to think about how to constructively use instability for the endeavors for which we're up to. I suggest that we make a pause here and we include now Alexandra into the discussion. In fact, we have evidence that it is not always efficient for groups to force themselves to reach consensus, right? And or finding an optimal solution. This is one of the key takeaways that a recent report by Alexandra and one of her colleagues at Nesta showed. And this report was on how to make good group decisions. And so, Alexandra, I'm super delighted to have you over today. Welcome to our fireside chat. Let me properly introduce you to our audience. Alexandra is the principal researcher at Nesta's Center for Collective Intelligence Design. She's the lead author of the report, The Future Minds and Machines, on combining human and machine intelligence for problem solving. She's also a co-author of the Playbook for Collective Intelligence Design, a toolkit for creating projects that mobilize collective intelligence, which has been used to train over 370 staff as part of the UNDP's Accelerator Lab network. So, Alexandra, most recently, you have been leading a research project delivering in partnership with the International Federation of the Red Cross on collective crisis intelligence and participatory AI. And prior of Nesta, you've been working in science policy, covering a broad range of topics from the role of citizen science and research and innovation to the societal implications of machine learning. Welcome to our talk today. We're happy to also have the perspective of a neuroscientist represented today. So we just heard from Paul these principles to enhance collective problem solving in order to scale up our responses for macro challenges. Now, your work at the Global Innovation Foundation allowed you to really gather expert insight on how to best harness collective intelligence. Now, we all know that collective intelligence isn't something really new. Today, we can witness new tools changing our ability to make good group decisions. So what is today's essence of collective intelligence to you, Alex? And which are ways of cultivating it that excites you the most?
Thank you so much for that introduction, although it's a bit daunting. And I have to just say, I haven't been introduced as a neuroscientist for at least 5 years since I transitioned from academia. So please don't ask me any neuroscience questions. I'm very much now in the kind of translation space and working in policy and participatory design of these collective intelligence systems. So I guess the kind of definition that my team uses and the focus of our research is on the methods that have been enabled by digital technologies. So the methods that bring people together to work on problems through digital technologies, and that includes anything from citizen science to crowdsourcing to crowd forecasting platforms, also the kind of digital democracy initiatives that we see, the most probably established of which are participatory budgeting systems, but also online deliberation platforms. So my team looks across this broad range of methods and tries to understand what are some of the kind of core components of designing them so that they maximize the impact and the contribution from groups of people and enhance the collaboration if that's the kind of goal, or that they aggregate the contributions from asynchronous participation in the best possible ways. And I guess maybe that's also a distinction that I think is important to make when we're considering large-scale collective intelligence, that there is this idea of many independent contributions which might be happening asynchronously, of individuals really working on single tasks, and then the collective intelligence is the kind of emergent property when you combine or aggregate all of those contributions, versus having this more interdependent collective intelligence where you have people synchronously debating or developing on each other's ideas, so that you have in real time a kind of emergent output that is made through the contributions of many people. And was there a second part, sorry, that I haven't?
No, I think that's already a great definition. Thank you, Alex. So at Nesta, I've just mentioned that in the intro, at Nesta, your research focuses on how human and machine can work together to develop innovative solutions to social challenges. And over the last years, you and your colleagues have been working with the UNTP's network of 90 accelerator labs that I also have mentioned, to use collective intelligence design for the advancement of the SDGs. Could you explain to us what did you focus on to ensure a smooth adoption? We all know the SDGs, it's a very complex framework. You can easily get lost in the sustainability space. How did you manage to allow for a smooth adoption of the principles and also of the key takeaways of your research for these 90 accelerator labs?
So we were a knowledge partner along with other organizations for the Accelerator Lab Network. And what that meant is as these new teams were being established and set up, and actually they were very small teams in each of those 90 locations, probably about 4 or 5 people in each single lab, that we had a boot camp system to make sure that when people were first joining, they had a baseline kind of foundation of different skills and an understanding of collective intelligence design. And for that, we used our collective intelligence design playbook and kind of fast-tracked through a design process over the course of a week. And it was one of many different skills that were trained in that foundational boot camp. We also had programs that ran with subsets of the labs. So one that I can talk about is what we called the Collective Intelligence Design Studio, where we worked with 13 labs from, they were very different locations, very different regional contexts, but all of them focusing on the wider issue of waste management. And so it was up to the individual labs to kind of determine what their specific local context focus would be for that problem. But then as a group, over a 6-week period, we went through a series of design exercises and tasks that would help them to set up projects locally with partners who could then either make use of participatory sensing or GIS, or I mean, there was a whole range of methodologies. And I think that one of the things that is so exciting about collective intelligence design is that there really is this kind of pick and mix approach when it comes to adapting the methodology to the one that's most appropriate for the problem at hand, whether you're trying to really understand some of the issues and probe into the kind of causalities involved, or uncover some of the kind of hidden patterns that weren't previously there, because the people who get involved in these projects are well, what we advocate for, it's the people on the ground who really have an understanding of a local issue. And so you end up really, what I like to say is making the invisible visible. So if you're working, for example, in that waste management kind of design studio that we ran, one of the labs worked with people who were part of the informal waste economy in Vietnam to understand the kind of role that they were playing in managing waste, and I guess demonstrating that a lot of the time when it comes to the SDGs, the data that we collect is through official mechanisms that don't take into account some of these contributors who are actually playing a vital part in the ecosystem. So maybe this also relates to what Paul was saying about us having a more kind of systemic approach, and not only like relying on some of those traditional infrastructures that we have in place. And I have to say that through the kind of review of existing collective intelligence initiatives that are currently contributing to the SDGs, one of the real gaps that we found is that there's a whole range of kind of exciting innovations happening, but it's very piecemeal, it's very disconnected, and there isn't a good way for some of these smaller scale experiments and pilots to then tap into the official infrastructure, and where we have those gaps in monitoring our progress on sustainable development goals, we're not actually taking advantage of some of the data that is being collected through those projects.
Wow, wonderful. I can see a lot of parallels to what we are doing at Geneva Impacts in our initiative. And that brings me, in fact, in this context, to introduce to everyone also Leonie Achtnich to you. She has a PhD in comparative literature and has been lecturing at the Freie Universität Berlin for the past years. She also has been working as a journalist and freelance writer for a number of German magazines and research institutions. And her topics include science communication, research, and nature, which brings her to Geneva Macrolabs. And we're really pleased to have her soon aboard as our new head of communications. So Leonie, just following the discussion and the insight that Alex just have shared, could you explain a little bit more on how we are engaging our community for sustainable innovation? How can we ensure that sustainable innovation remains a top priority? And what's happening in our space?
Yes, thank you, Marianne, and welcome everyone. I'm very happy to be here and to become a part of the Geneva Macrolabs community. And today's online talk provides me with the opportunity not only to get to know all of you a little bit better, but also to share with you some news concerning the new innovation cycle 2021, which we are organizing as part of the Geneva Impacts Initiative. And I think this will answer your question, Marianne.
Mm-hmm.
So many of you met at the Kickstarter event in December to vote upon a topic for this new challenge. And as you might already know, the topic is online participation and data control. And I think this connects nicely with today's talk and its focus on collective intelligence, innovation, and sustainability. So the new topic is an important part of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are at the heart of Geneva Macro Labs. And Goal 9 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals states that we need to build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. And we at Geneva Macro Labs are convinced that a big part of an inclusive future is to strengthen digital civic engagement and to assure that we can all participate in the online world without fearing for our data. So today, everyone with access to the internet can engage in political debate. So we can share pictures, we can express opinions, we can provide consumer data or even donate health information. But by participating online, we are also, of course, giving away valuable data. And often such data are exploited, leaving little or no control to individuals. Even in the best case scenario, we are rewarded with a bit of pocket change for donating our personal data for marketing purposes. But more often than not, I mean, we all know this, we just get customized commercials in return. So this is our challenge in 2022. What if we were in control of our data instead of giving it away? And what if we would find ways to make use of this data for purposes that we believe in? While feeding marketing campaigns or AI, our data can also scale the knowledge of startups or NGOs. They can also play a crucial role in fostering new forms of citizen participation. So data can facilitate, for example, the transition to a circular economy. It could help to manage and foster global health, or it could support science. So we believe that when data is shared in a trustworthy way, it can have a long-term impact on democracy. Inclusive participation like e-voting or health data donations could eventually become our future, but such development requires transparency, and even more importantly, data donors need to remain in full control. So this is our call for the new Geneva Impacts Initiative in 2022. We are looking for projects where personal data can be shared in a controlled and trustworthy way. This could bring a new dimension to digital democracy. And this is also where our community comes into the picture. So you come into the picture. So please join us in looking for projects and in developing them over the course of the next months at our Design Thinking Hackathon, which starts on the 9th of February and ends on the 14th of February. We will use all of our collective intelligence and come up with new ideas and solutions. You will have the chance to collaborate with a diverse community of sustainability enthusiasts and experiment with some of the principles that Paul talked about today. The University of Geneva will be among our new partners, and we are pleased to offer you an open innovation process that allows for collaboration. So please visit our hackathon website for further information, and do not hesitate to get in touch with us directly. Yes, thank you, Marianne.
Thank you, Leni. And it's nice to have a little bit of promotion of what's happening in our space. So great that we could have you over today. And also great that you will soon be starting officially within our team. So that's really exciting. Alexandra, I would like to kind of now draw back to you what we just have been sharing. You were referring to some of your work in the space of applying, actually bringing different teams together, diverse teams. You referred to this one example where you would have many different teams that are small teams, 4 to 5 people, who would then follow this playbook to basically unveil how this new methodology of shedding light to those contributors that have not been contributing by their, that have been contributing, but that have not been acknowledged by official institutions, for example, in waste management, to be part of the solution. And I think that's something important to bring, to shed light on those who are contributing but have not been in the center of focus in the past. And that brings us nicely to a topic that is dear to us, which is new technology, for instance, artificial intelligence. And I think that you, Eckhard, you have a question for Alexandra in that regard, how the interplay between AI, collective intelligence can be thought about.
Yeah, thanks, Marianne. And I do indeed, but I would say that in the interest of time, I actually hold this question back for a moment. I know that we already have some very exciting questions in the chat, some critical points as well. So I wanted to invite actually Thala to maybe raise her point and ask our speakers to maybe respond to that. So Thala, over to you.
Thank you, Eckhard. Thank you to the speakers for a very informative session. I do a lot of work in terms of diversity and inclusion, and we see that there are wide gaps, in particular to what Mariana was talking about in AI and data collection, and that these systems are biased and racist and not inclusive in terms of collecting data. So my concern in terms of collective intelligence and what your second speaker was speaking about is that it's good on paper. Essentially, we're very heavy on the research and study side and not enough in terms of the actionable side, in terms of inclusivity. And that comes to your first speaker, who is talking about you have to basically overturn the organization and look at the underbelly of the organization. Are there colonial structures there? Is there inherent bias? What kind of collective intelligence from that group is being put forward? Has the private sector group worked with the indigenous communities to actually shape that collective intelligence? And so that's what I wanted to kind of bring to this session. Thank you very much, Eckhard.
Thanks, Thala. Maybe we do exactly as you pointed out. Maybe we start with Alex first and then with Paul.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for the comment, Thala. I think you're absolutely right that a lot of what we see is the kind of promise of collective intelligence through the academic research and the theory, that actually when it comes to implementation, we don't follow through on the recommendations that come out of that research when it comes to actually tapping into collective intelligence. All of the studies show about the importance of diversity of the participants and the ability for everyone to contribute so that you are surfacing different viewpoints and different skills and different information. And actually the kind of infrastructures that exist within organizations, between organizations, don't typically allow for that. One of the reasons that my team focuses on design is that we're trying to understand how, and design isn't a fix for everything. I don't think that's true. Like it's just not going to be able to solve some deeply ingrained kind of biases and structures that we have in society, but at least it can shine a light on what are where those biases are happening, and if there is a potential to structure a process in a better way, then we are trying to get the evidence for how that can be adjusted and improved. One of the things that I'm really passionate about is when it comes to AI technology and how that is being used within collective intelligence methods and the kind of online processes that we see, is how we can start to use participatory design of those AI systems to try and mitigate or counteract some of the potential harms that they otherwise cause, whether that is in the data collection phase of getting the more representative data sets that would allow those AI systems to be more appropriate across a range of different contexts, or not different contexts. So I should say that actually the problem is that we transfer AI systems between different contexts without really thinking how appropriate they are. But I guess the understanding what data you need for a particular problem and making sure that you are having a representative data set to train an AI system, but also in the process of actually developing algorithms, having an iterative kind of design process with both the users of those tools, but also the communities or the groups that could be affected by the use of those tools. and also having kind of mechanisms of oversight once that technology is actually deployed, so that it can be questioned by different groups again. And we have an active project at the moment, so Marianne referred to it at the beginning, with the International Federation for the Red Cross, where we are trying to test new participatory methods to develop predictive systems in the humanitarian space. And I should say that we're taking a critical approach of whether it is even appropriate to have predictive systems applied to problems in humanitarian action. But I think there's been a lot of emphasis on participation as being a potential way to not only make sure that some of those new tools could be more appropriate and have better oversight, but also so that there's that tie to another big driver in the humanitarian space of localization and including or being driven by innovation, being driven by the people who are actually affected by crises. So I mean, I think that there's a lot of work to do, and particularly in that shift from the purely theoretical to the making it practical and actionable. And that's the thing that really I'm excited and passionate about in our work, that we're trying to make that translation and to learn from it, so that we are building up that evidence base.
Thank you, Alex. So Paul, are we overselling collective intelligence? Are we not taking into account the pitfalls that Tala mentioned enough?
I think that happens. I mean, I'd give some examples of where you can apply new technology in smart ways, but localized for local conditions. And it seems to me the answer to that particular challenge, which is a really good one, is that you must think about the local context, local conditions. So if you take mobile phones, if you go back 20 years, the idea was that in Africa, you would have to put in this massively expensive infrastructure for fixed telephone lines and fixed exchanges in order to link up the whole of Africa. Along comes this new technology called the mobile phone. You can use the mobile phone to do all sorts of things. And what very rapidly has happened in Africa over the last 10 years or so is that if you just take one example, that's insurance. What companies have done in listening to what is happening in their local communities, the local markets and so forth, is to say, how can we sell insurance to people who need to get back on their feet, for example, if there's a drought, or if they need to insure some of their machinery that they're using. So you can actually do your insurance via a mobile phone. Now, to me, that's a way of thinking very carefully about local conditions, not just importing a Western model directly to countries in Africa, which is too expensive to do, and gets that country potentially into all sorts of problems with debt. I mean, I think we're seeing this with China, with this massive infrastructure building projects by China, who want to extract their pound of flesh. They want a huge amount for that. And that, to me, is dark consequences. That worries me a lot. Whereas I think thinking just simply about local conditions, how can we apply this? What works as a business model? And how can we therefore collaborate in building this thing? And this kind of thing was done over the last 10 years or so locally. It was working closely with other people. So I suspect that the challenge of doing too much theory and too much research and then not applying it goes back to what I was saying earlier. We have to experiment, try things, fail, get it wrong, listen to people in the local environment, and build the infrastructure that is right for them, as opposed to importing something that isn't going to work.
Excellent, thank you. I wanted to bring in John here. He had some interesting thoughts about this as well. So maybe, John, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question as well.
Thanks, Eckhard. I have one response to Alex first, which is what AI seems to do is to change the risk landscape. This is what technologies do. We have a different risk landscape within society, a different risk landscape within organizations, because the technology of AI has been introduced and we don't yet know how to manage those risks. it's something that is rapidly coming to the fore. And the management of AI, digital and technological risk, I think, is something that we should focus on or something that would give us a focus for forward motion in this area. But otherwise, I agree entirely with what you say. The point I made in the thing in the chat was something about looking for. My view on collective intelligence is different. Is slightly different. Intelligence is something that we arrive at when we do other things. Intelligence is a technology that human beings have that can be applied in certain situations. Traditionally, those situations were more or less engineering. So we're looking for solutions to a problem, to a need in context. And to do that, what we generally do, and this is something that Vincenzi in his book, What Engineers Know and How They Know It, wrote very nicely on, is we look for essentially components that we're trying to combine in novel ways. And it is the novelty of the combination for which intelligence is applied, which gives us the solution to engineering problems. Now, we're much more sophisticated than traditional engineering problems in this forum. But the sort of problems Paul was talking very interestingly about, the massive global problems that we have, are still going to be solved by looking for components, although those components are going to be very distant from what traditionally a component is. It's going to be organizations, it's going to be individuals, it's going to be different sets of resources. We're going to combine them in ways which they've never been combined in before, and that's where the innovation comes. The combination between the current things which can solve the problem. Now, for me, intelligence is a technology which in the traditional sense of engineering is applied when you need to combine things. More modern intelligences, the intelligence that we're talking about today, is when and that view is for an individual. What we're talking about is groups of individuals working together and try to combine these very complex components in very innovative ways to solve truly difficult global scale problems. And I'm wondering what the nature of, or what that says about the nature of a collective intelligence as the technology of groups that allow us to be innovative when we're combining things at this global scale. It's a very long question. I apologize for that. But I want to see collective innovation, even collective innovation rather than collective intelligence, collective innovation as the output of a process rather than the input to a process, because that allows us to characterize the needs of it.
Thank you, John. Paul, you want to give it a try? It's a challenging question.
First point I'd make is that intelligence, it can be seen as, I think John called it a technology, but we also know that it's not a technology, it's in here, and it allows us to process information in a particular way. Now, if you're suggesting that our brains are a type of technology, fine. But that kind of computer analogy is getting a bit dated now. So I think I like the point you made, I think in your note to everyone, John, about, is innovation simply the outcome of putting different components together, and it's the gap between those components that creates the innovation. That's probably right to some extent. I think there are other ways that innovation happens, and it can be social innovation, which has nothing to do necessarily with creating technology. It's simply the way people start interacting with each other or trading. So it's interesting when you look back on the history of new inventions. The typewriter industry ran for about 100 years, or a bit more than 100 years, and it was the single way at that time to capture large amounts of information and put them down in a data record, if you like. And then somebody invented the word processor because it was a quicker way of doing typing, basically. So it was a solution to a particular problem. And then very rapidly, the PC emerged, and that created a complete change in the typewriter industry. So I think you're right in the sense that these changes can create massive opportunities, which the collective intelligence, if you want to put it that way, then uses in newer and newer ways over time. And the outcome, I think, of all that stuff that went on in the 1960s and 70s and so forth, is that we have very small machines we call smartphones that can do all sorts of things that we couldn't do before. And so that's the application, I think, of lots of different people thinking about how to do things differently with a new technology that is emerging and developing and evolving all the time. I don't know whether that answers your particular question, but I wasn't sure what the question was, John.
Well, it's more of the process of arriving at collective intelligence rather than collective intelligence being the starting point. Yeah. But I agree with most of what you say. I do have a rather loose definition of what a component is. So it would include, and I apologize for this, it would include people, it would include organizations, and also technologies like the brain have not been designed to be technologies, but they do act in the role of technologies at certain points in the innovation cycle. But otherwise, yeah, totally on board.
I don't mind being called a component.
Let's hear what Alex wants to add to that.
I don't know, John, if you're familiar with Jeff Malgan's writing on collective intelligence. So he was formerly the CEO at Nesta, the organization I'm at. His book Big Mind, I think, would kind of resonate with some of the ideas that you were putting forward, where you have the different components that could be made up either by an organization, by an individual, by data, by the kind of technical infrastructure, and it's bringing all of those together that actually results in a kind of collective intelligence system as such. And Tom Malone has similar ideas when it comes to thinking about superminds and how machines and people and organizations can be networked to produce, again, a kind of collective intelligence assembly. So those might be two kind of sources that you would want to look at. I mean, I also was just thinking when it comes to innovation, the kind of balance between exploration and exploitation. And I think from the methods that my team works with, there are certain kind of digitally enabled methods that might tap into either exploitation of a particular idea and enhancing that versus the kind of exploration where you're tapping into the diversity of inputs, the collective intelligence to then produce something. So I think of a challenge prize model or competition, online kind of competitions to create new algorithms or solutions, that they often kind of make use of that exploration where you're bringing forward lots of different people with different skills, or tapping into like a distributed workforce essentially, that can then propose different solutions to the same problem, and you come try and get the best one. And then I guess when it comes to exploitation, one thing that comes to mind, an example I've looked at in the past, is how open source communities develop code and shared kind of software tools, where you have lots of different people who are building the same product and using the kind of same rules of interaction in order to continuously enhance something together. I think we actually don't have great tools that allow us to be to work kind of in a interactive and synchronous way and be creative when it comes to innovation, and also be more imaginative. I think that's really the kind of future that I would like to see, where we're bringing together artificial intelligence, some of the generative systems that we see, which I think it's OpenAI that in the last year published a new system that combine the best of, or the most recent advances in natural language processing and computer vision, so that you could, using a description, short description, have a AI system generate an image for you. And that just seems to me like an amazing way to test out ideas on an individual basis. But then if you kind of imagine having that kind of tool at your disposal in a team and an organization to explore potential solutions to a problem, I just think that can be incredibly exciting. And to me, that also seems like a more interesting thing to invest in when it comes to AI. And so how can it help us to be more creative and imaginative when it comes to solving some of the big problems we face?
Excellent, Alex. I think especially your point on the trade-offs involved in different forms of collective intelligence as they apply to social functions like exploration versus exploitation, I think is extremely important and certainly worthwhile to continue the discussion. But before we do that, I wanted to bring in Patrick, who wants to bring us back a bit more to the issue that reunites you tonight, is more on sustainability. So Patrick, over to you.
Yeah, hi, thanks very much. Really interesting chat. And I'm getting a bit maybe lost on the academic side of collective intelligence. But I've just done a little course, high-level course on introduction to impact investing and SDGs. And a lot of it's based around stakeholder capitalism. So what you were talking about there about what's happening in Africa and, going local and getting the views of everyone impacted by the local business. It's essentially a form of stakeholder capitalism, which is stakeholder reaching out to all the different stakeholders of a business. And my point was, if you just keeping the AI side out of it now for the moment, because I'm not really hugely up to speed on that, but if you have a diverse set of people going out doing the requirements gathering from all these different set of stakeholders, diversity, it won't remove all biases, but it will certainly dilute biases, quite substantially. And then as you get all those different requirements from all those different stakeholders, and maybe you give them back to a data science team, you can, there's quite an obvious framework there that you can without investing or without maybe paying for a huge, academic collective intelligence for every business, you can actually achieve quite a lot in terms of for society by adopting that kind of a framework. And I just, I think it was more of a statement rather than a question, but if you guys want to make a remark on that, then that'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. I think, Alex, you probably have some concrete examples where you can answer that or can give help Patrick maybe with the examples or your experience in Nesta.
Yeah, I can try. I can certainly try. I mean, I think that there is a lot of value in having those kind of grounded insights and to really collect data from many different sources. I guess one thing I would caution against is what that is then being used for, and what is the involvement of those communities once the data is collected and what they know, how much they can determine how it is used. I think that's really where we have a massive gap still. And there are, I think, a lot smarter people than me who are trying to work with communities across also the kind of international development context, but I know in the US as well, who are focused on a more kind of social justice oriented approach to data collection, and really thinking through how those data sets can be put to use for the people who actually are generating them. I think there's also something about, when it comes to data collection, about how we even frame the problems and what data we collect when it comes to the SDGs, for example. If we're thinking about air pollution, the kind of targets that have been designed and determined, they don't always correspond to the concerns of people on the ground and the kind of things they want to be collecting data about. So I think there's a lot of value in early, from the outset of a kind of project design or any kind of initiative that is starting to look at a particular issue to in problem definition already be working with the kind of communities who are affected by that issue, so that then you can design all of the stages of the project to respond to their needs as well, rather than maybe that being dictated by already some kind of predetermined objectives that we've set. So I think that's at least what we've been trying to do through some of the work with the Accelerator Lab network. But it's really hard, I think, going back to Tyler's point as well, because actually institutional actors hold a lot of power, and they're a vital component. I don't think that we can, that we need to, not have them be a part of the equation. It's just figuring out how to better not reconcile all of the kind of differences in values and priorities, but identify at least some of the common goals that those different groups have, and be able to work towards them. I don't know whether that's kind of a helpful place to leave it, but hopefully it is.
So yeah, if I'm allowed to respond, I just wanted to say it was more about collecting data to track progress of SDG goals. So for making impact on your ABCs. And I oversimplified it and didn't think about the social justice of collecting data. But yeah, it was basically to collect data on the progress of SDGs. But the success of that, the confidence that you have by doing that, will determine the uptake of impact investing or SDG investing for the broader business world, depending on how successful that is. I just thought. But thank you.
Paul, what's your take on this?
Not sure, actually. I think if Patrick's got a particular question around this for me, I'm happy to try and answer it, but I can't give an answer to that one.
Okay.
Paul, just listening to the conversation, I really had to think about the part of the presentation that you were not able to show anymore due to the time, but you prepared, maybe we can share later with the audience, but you prepared these 5 steps for transformation, right? And it seems to me that when we're talking about identifying the common pain points or the priority list of problems, of challenges we want to focus on, we need to do our homework diligently here to not misuse the collective intelligence at the later stage to justify some priorities that were just important for a specific group, but not for the greater community which was meant to be included. And that kind of, to me, alludes to what Costa was writing about the constraints within certain organizations for implementing change.
Yeah, and I think if you think about this in a single organization faces similar problems of in whose interest is it to make this change, or if there's a transformation, how will I lose and how will they gain? And so the same sorts of problems arise, and it's about aligned interests. And in particular, I think one of the advantages of being in an organization is that you can create ownership of the problem, ownership of the innovation, ownership of the solutions, and ownership of the deployment of that innovation. And therefore, you have aligned interests, and therefore you don't get into this problem of collaboration and vested interests and differences of opinion and inability to make things actually happen. And so the question then becomes, well, how can you do this across enterprises or across agencies so that you don't have this problem of getting stuck and then using your collective intelligence to justify your position? And so I think you can probably apply some of the same principles. You need to focus probably first on just getting alignment about what the cooperation is about, what you're trying to achieve, what the purpose is. And I think sometimes what happens is that NGOs and other agencies come together and they all have a different perspective on what it is they're trying to achieve. That needs to be ironed out early on so that you are working in the same way. One of the points I make in Big Change in the book is that you need to spend time at the outset on what I call awakening, getting people to wake up to the issue that you're trying to solve. What is it you're trying to solve? And then pushing that out into the distance and saying, so what could it look like in the future? And then what you do is you create a conception of what the future can look like. So you're very clear what it is you're trying to achieve. And I think that sometimes is missing when there's cooperation across different enterprises or different agencies. It's not, that work hasn't been done. I think a lot of the problems arise from this idea of ownership. Can you create ownership? Who actually owns this? Is it everyone, or is it only one particular group? Or does everyone own something different? And therefore you're actually competing.
I think on this last point, Jörn had some interesting reflection based on the article that he and our colleagues wrote. And maybe Jörn, you want to come in on this point?
Yeah, thank you, Eckhard. Well, in our endeavor, we found that communication is key, and diversity can enhance understanding if people learn to understand, and this is can only be achieved by communication. And we had facilitators in every focus group that help to facilitate this understanding. And we found that if you just let diverse people talk in a room, you find yourself like in a bubble tower. Everybody talks, but they don't understand. So you have to bring this to a level of understanding and communication that you really achieve a better sum of everything of all participants through communication and facilitation. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks. Paul, any reaction, or Alex? Oh, you're muted, Paul.
Yeah, I would say that I think this is about alignment of interests. I take a point that Max has made just on chat about the underlying assumption that collective intelligence can overcome, all sorts of disparate views, and I don't think that is true. And I don't quite accept the point that it's only about communication. Communication definitely helps. The problem is, if people's interests aren't aligned, you'll never get them to actually operate and cooperate and collaborate. And I think there's an assumption when we're looking at sustainability challenges that people are doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They feel it's a good thing to do, and therefore they must be working together. But people aren't like that. People can be very self-interested. They do care about their careers. They do care about their organization. They do care about research funding. They do care about their success. And so I think we have to actually put time into work on how to collaborate, how to be a team, how to create success, what our purpose is, before you start working on the innovation. I suspect, the people sitting around here, there's lots of PhDs and research backgrounds. We like working on the innovation. We don't like working on the other stuff, which is how you operate as a team.
I mean, on this point, on the communication and the collaboration part, actually, Alex, maybe you can help us out as well a bit with your experience on how you actually mobilize maybe even AI on this particular point to foster communication among communities.
Yeah, I just wanted to go, first of all, can I respond to Paul's point? Because I think he's completely right that we are all self-interested, and there's actually some interesting experiments that we funded in the past, which have looked at the dilemmas. I've forgotten completely. It's gone completely out of my head what they're called. The collective value dilemmas, or essentially where a group of people has to make a decision that has a collective benefit versus an individual gain in the short term. And the experiment that we funded, it was run by a lab based in Belgium, and they had introduced AI agents into the group decision-making process to help groups make better decisions when it comes to sustainability challenges, essentially making sacrifices in the short term to avoid collective risk in the long term. It's collective risk dilemmas. It's really interesting because actually people really struggle to make the collectively beneficial choice. When you introduce an AI agent that is able to help the group achieve that collectively beneficial choice, then people have struggle to cede their agency to the AI agent. So I think there is the potential for AI to help us overcome some of those kind of biases that we have, and to like even surface them so that we become more aware of them. But there's still a lot of work that we need to do in understanding what that relationship is that we have with AI, and how much we are willing to trust it in certain circumstances, even if, as in the situation that I described, we could probably agree that it's trying to push us towards a collectively beneficial outcome. And yet it's still that letting go of our specialness, or as humans, that we are better able to make that decision. It's something that we will struggle with. We will continue to struggle with. There's also some other experiments that we funded, to speak to your point, Eckhard, where there are ways of improving the kind of communication networks that you have between individuals online, so that you can improve information sharing, and that can be algorithmically kind of determined. So potentially there's something interesting there about the way that we design communication. But then, of course, we've also seen, all of us, the examples of how that can go wrong in terms of polarization in social networks as well. So I don't think it's just an easy solution.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Before I hand it back to Marianne, Paul, Alex, maybe one quick last statement about your own takeaway about collective intelligence and how it applies to macro challenges.
Well, I think if you can mobilize collective intelligence in this at the right time, I think that's going to be helpful. I'd go back to my point about you need to mobilize the team around a collective purpose in the same way you do in an organization. You're just doing it across organizations. And if you can create that higher ambition and get people joined up to believe in it and to want to work for it and to own it, the idea of ownership is terribly important always, then I think collective intelligence becomes, to use John's term, a technology which can help in the innovation process. But I would worry about putting collective intelligence first and saying, if we can only just get our collective intelligence mobilized, we'll solve all the problems of the world. We won't, because it won't be focused. There are plenty of examples of where it's gone wrong.
Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, so I guess I think that we need to start being a little bit more focused, like Paul has said, but also I guess there's the kind of charm of the word in itself, but it can start to almost seem like it means everything. So the whole world is built on collective intelligence, really, and you start to see it everywhere. But then I think that isn't very constructive when it comes to us thinking about how to design better systems, and what are the best design choices when it comes to like online interactions for deliberation. It's not going to be the same as the design choices that are good for a forecasting experiment or for an innovation experiment. So I think we just need to start actually being more nuanced when we talk about collective intelligence, and say, like, what exactly do we mean? What problem are we focusing on? What method are we trying to use? And yeah, I guess it's very similar to the point that Paul has made, and I think that's also the exciting thing, because once we start to be much more specific, we can start to build that evidence base so that it becomes a bit less wishy-washy, and we can actually start to make progress on it.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think you both just kind of restated the motto of Geneva Microlabs: designing focused collective intelligence to solve global problems. That's exactly what our motto is. So with that, I hand it over to Marianne, and thank you both for your excellent discussion, excellent contribution tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Eckhard, and also thank you, Alex and Paul. And also thank you to everyone who contributed to the discussion today. I followed the chat and comments, and I hope that everybody feels to have had the chance to express his or her opinion and idea. I like the phrase, let's not do wishy-washy, but let's be specific and concrete. I think it's a great mantra, Alex. So one more time before we close tonight's session, I would like to extend again our invitation to our Design Thinking Hackathon, which will give us all a perfect opportunity to experience collective intelligence in progress. We intend, as we discussed today, to bring these different levels together from small teams then to the greater macro view to scale up the impact projects that we are developing. So yeah, if you would like to engage in our community to co-shape our work as a Think and Do Tank, please get in touch with us. We are always happy to welcome new members to our community. I will share the link in the chat in a second. And yeah, I think we are coming to the end of today's event in time. We are happy that you could join us. And in the name of the whole team, I wish you all a good rest of the day, wherever you're joining us from today. And I hope to welcome you very soon again. And I also hope that we can continue our discussion that we just started today, as I feel that collective intelligence is something that we should all be reflecting on, since we all work in different teams, we all work in different setups, we all have our challenges, our purpose in the different organizations. And with that, I now wish you a nice evening or rest of the day, and yeah, bonsoir de Genève. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody. Have a good evening.
Bye. Have a nice evening. Thank you.